Okay. Good morning. We're learning as a schutz before Shlomo Filan Chai Basarach. We're continuing with the discussion of the Chamesh Mini Dagan that we said that the dinim of Chadash and Chala and other things apply b'dafka to them. So we said we'll just go back like 2 lines about a third of the way up from the bottom. Asur mechadash lefnei Pesach. We said that the chamesh mini dagan are asur and chadash. We changed it not lefnei Pesach, but to lefnei ha'omer. You know, and immediately we learn out from matzah, just like matzah is chamesh mini dagan. So to the like we said before, so to the dinim of omer will apply. Liksa lefnei omer. And which we changed to Lefnei Pesach, if you remember, we discussed yesterday that there are two separate Isurim in Chadash. When we talk about Chadash, we always think about eating, but I guess in earlier times, it was more relevant that you couldn't cut the Yomer you couldn't cut the Chamesh Mini Dagam before the Yomer. That's a separate, and as we'll see, a slightly less Chamordika. It doesn't apply in as many situations, and that also is not allowed. And we said we changed it. We said Lefnei Pesach. So Zaktamar Minani Mili. What do we know that also only applies to the Chamesh Mini Dagan? I'm Rabbi Yechon Asher Reishis Michal. We learned it out from Michal. Zaktamar my Kaidem Laimer. Where does Kaidem? What does it mean when it says Kaidem Laimer in that first thing that we said about Achila, the standard din of Chadash that we always think about? You're not allowed to eat chadash before the Omer. He says it means before the cutting of the Omer. That means until there's a mitzvah to cut the barley that's going to be used for the Omer. Prior to that, you're not allowed to eat. He says no. It has to be, you have to wait. You can't eat it even after they cut the Omer, which they did the night of the 16th. They had to wait till the Omer was actually brought before you could eat the Chamesh Minei Dagim. Tnan Asur Mechadash Lefnei Pesach. This is quoting our Mishnah, so we change it. Asur Mechadash Lefnei HaOmer. You can't eat the Chadash before the Omer is brought. The Liksa Lefnei Pesach. And you can't cut the issue of Katsiris of the Chamesh Minei Dagim starts before Pesach. According to the Mandama, when we say Asur Mechadash Lefnei HaOmer, that means before the Omer is brought. That's why we didn't combine it into one statement. Meaning it should have said, as the Gemara is going to say in a minute, it should have said, Asurin b'chadash v'liksar lifnei. You couldn't say Asurin b'chadash v'liksar lifnei ha'omer or lifnei ha'pesach because it's two separate times. The ksira starts lifnei ha'pesach, the night of the 16th, while the achila starts at the time of when you actually bring the omer. But according to Mandama, that you cannot eat from the Chamesh Minei Dagan from the Chadash before the cutting of the omer. Why can't you just say it as one statement? Once you're saying that it's before the Ktsira is on the night of the 16th, as Rashi says. The mashmal acha pesach shari miyad the ksiris ha'omer shari la'achila. I'm talking about ksir ha'mezach l'chashiv. Says it's irrelevant to talk about it's basically you're gonna have to wait anyway till the morning.
So they actually harvested on Yom Tov itself?
They are, yeah, sure. It's Deicha Shabbos. We said this before.
I'm saying
Ksira and the Havayas Omer is Deicha Shabbos. They would go on the night of Yom Tov
That's
And
over
if you
everyone,
remember, they would
right, but
prepare it
everyone else.
beforehand
But
to
I'm saying
minimize
practically,
the.
but
Well,
besides for the bringing of the Eimer, right? In the bit, right? But like for everyone else, what they
no,
went
they
out.
couldn't. No, they weren't allowed. No, you weren't
So
allowed to do.
then what's it? So how they have the food, the new grain, anyways?
How did they have new food to eat? They could have. You're saying no, because if you mean how was it cut? How was
Yeah,
it
I'm just trying to
available?
think like, there's like, I'm just trying to think what's going on here, like practically speaking. I would,
Well,
it's,
if you're not allowed to cut it, maybe it fell off.
oh, all right. Right.
So, according to the Man Amar, like Rashi says, let's say everything is before Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
That because both of them are saying it's going depending on Katsira. Both the din of that you're not allowed to be kaitzer the Chamish Mini Dagim before the Aimer, and the Achila means when you cut the Aimer, and that means the night of Pesach. And both of them are going to effectively, you can't do it before Pesach. Now, like you're saying, this is also going to be true to after Pesach. We're saying that you can't cut the Chamish Mini Dagan before the Ktsira, but the Ktsira first takes place on Pesach, so you're not going to be able to do it effectively anyway till the next day. Um, I'm not sure why he says "V'amtar miktsira v'adheir mezrich lechashi v'shulizim nekatz samach alayis hashachar." So it's irrelevant that there's a slight difference with them, that one is before Pesach and one is um, in the a little bit after, because anyway you're going to have to wait till the next morning. Um, Ela Yitma Aseife. So we're going to have to change that this Machlaikas Rabbi Yaina and Rabbi Yosef Bar Zavda is talking about a totally different discussion. In Meshrishu Kaidam Oimer, if someone had produce that took root before the Oimer is mata them. My Kaidam Oimer, what does it mean that it became Hushrish? It took root before the Oimer. Yaina Makaidam Abbas Oimer, Rabbi Yosef Bar Zavda, Makaidam Katsiris Oimer. So in order for it to be considered to be chada, to be not to be considered that it's chadash, that it's hutter from this, that the omer is machlef on it, is matter, and it has to have been taken root before the omer. And the question is that mean before they cut the omer, or does that mean before they bring the omer? And that's what they're arguing about. Amalei Rebbe Lazar, Rabbi Yoshia, the Dari. Relaz asked Rabbi Yeshua from his dar, "Letesev akarach." I don't want you to sit down. Adovashel l'hamas nisim to explain to this mission. I mean, nine la'im mishemater ba'ashrosh. This din that we just mentioned, that we said Rabbi Yena, Rabbi Yosef Azavda are arguing about, that they say that when is it that Hashrosha is going to make the Chomesh Mini Dagan to be considered part of this year's harvest, that is Chodesh, that it becomes mutter from the Heimer. Where do we know that Hashrasha is what makes it that what makes it part of that? That's considered that it's part of this year. The Chsiv Aviv, the pasuk says, the imtakriv minchas bikurim lashem. When you bring the minchas ha'omer, the mincha of the new fruit of the new grain, aviv, which means that when it's ripe, kalui, and roast kalui ba'esh, roasted in fire, garish. Um, that is, I think that means that it's what was Garish again? I don't remember. And Carmel, which is we said soft, Takav is Minchas Bikurech. So the Siv Aviv, Lav Machlal, the Ikad Lava. From the fact that we're saying that the Omer has to come from what's ripe, that means that there's some things there are others things that are becoming Hutter al Yedei the Omer that are not ripe. The Lav Aviv, Lav Machlal, the Ikad, the Lav Aviv. What's the Aleph? The Dilma, so tomorrow, no, that's not. So we're saying that that means that it's something, whatever is hushrash, is going to be lav aviv. It's not ripe. So Gemara, the lav aviv loylam da'ayil shlish. No, just because it's not ripe doesn't mean that it's only took root. It already becomes part of this year that the omer is matter. Maybe it has to be a significant amount that already grew a third of its growth, which is clearly much later than hashrosh. Elam Shmuel mehachel chormish. We said when he uses the scythe to cut the grain. So for the fact that he's saying that he's cutting from what's standing there, there must be that there are things that become hutter. This is the thing. The omer is from things you cut from grain that's already out of the ground. So you see that the things that are not standing up, that those are become mutter. The labar chamash. So about dilma the labar chamash. Loylam shachas. But maybe Gemara says no, that you could have that's not yet charmish. It's not yet a standing crop. It's not a growing crop, but it's shachas, which is a earlier stage. It's going to be used for animal feed. Rav Yitzchak kama. It says that it's standing. La machlal de labar kama. That could mean that it's talking about something that's not standing at all. That's that it's l'chayr the Gemara is saying that means that it's only hushrash that becomes mutter. So I want to know dilma d'labar kama loylam agam. Maybe it's not standing, but it's growing from the ground, but it's still bad, still soft. It's a soft sprout, but that's still later than hashrasha. So how do we know that as soon as it's hushrash, as soon as it takes root, all these diukim that we're making are later stages of development? But how does the Mishnah know to go as far as to say that anything that's hushrash is going to be considered to be hutar? That it's not going to be, it's going to be hutar the aimer that the chadash from mutati. Elamarava asher tizra mishasriya. The Torah says asher tizra, whatever you planted. So it means as soon as you planted it, which is hashrash. We say asher tizra means as soon as you plant it, anything that's planted in the ground should become mutter. That it's no longer chadash. It's no longer asal chadash. So tomorrow, Amalei Sudni. The Sudni is a lashon that says he's a Talmud Chacham. It says, Rashi has a long explanation. Talmidei Chacham al Shem Soid Hashem Lireyev. Since it's called, so we call someone who has the secrets, who's the holder of the secrets, we call a Sudni, a Talmud Chacham. Zaktamara, Misadik said. The Torah says a Sada. A Sada means that it has to be that it's planted. So Hushrash is the minimum of planted. Okay. Zak the Mishnah. Now we're talking about, like we said, there are two parts of the Isser of Chadash. Right? There's the Isser that you're not allowed to eat Chadash, and there's a separate Isser, you're not allowed to cut Chadash, you're not allowed to go into harvest your Chomesh Minei Dagan, like we said, prior to the first day of Pesach, the second day of Pesach. Zak the Mishnah. Even though we're not allowed to be kaitzer, you're not allowed to harvest the grains before the Eimer, but the Beis Hashlachim, which are irrigated fields in Bamakim and valleys, as the Gemara is going to explain later, the Bamakim, these valleys don't produce good grain, and therefore they're not viable, they're not eligible to be used to be brought as the Minchas Eimer. So since they're not eligible to be brought as a Minchas Eimer, they're also excluded from the Isser Katsirav of Tvua before the Eimer. So therefore you're allowed to harvest them. Avaloy Goitchin, but you can't put them and make them into piles because we're worried, as the Mishnah itself is going to explain, essentially, that you can't put in piles because we're scared that they'll go ahead and eat it. All what we just said now is that the Isser of Katsira is mutter when something is not eligible for the Eimer, but there is no heter achila of chadash before the Yomer for such tvua. So therefore, you can't pile it up because we're worried that if as they're piling it up, they'll come to eat it. Anshe Yerichai kaitzim beratzon chachamim v'gaitzim b'shalei beratzon chachamim. Anshe Yerichai would cut it, which is like we said in the beginning of the Mishnah, the chacham allowed it, but they were gainish, and that was connected the chachamim. The chacham were not meicha against them because they were only saying it's asur because they'll come to eat it. So even though the chacham masak and they shouldn't do it, once they did it, they didn't feel it was necessary to be meicha since it was just a gather of a takanas chacham. Obviously, one should not take that. That doesn't mean that applies to us when we have we shouldn't think that because there's something is a gather, we can go and violate it because the chamun amoicha. It just meant that ex post facto, b'shas ma'isa, they made the takana, but people who didn't follow it, they didn't feel the takana remained in place. They feel it was necessary to chastise them for it. Koitzer l'shachas. The Mishnah says you can harvest chadash if it's unripe. Shachas is unripe grain. Machal lebehem. Or I think the sheet changes the lashon a little. Umachal lebehem. If you're intending to feed it to your animal, then that's not a katsira because again, it's not intended to be used as the Gemara will go more into the details of this of what this means. But if it's both unripe and he intends to feed it to his animal, then it's not going to be usher to cut it. Rav Yehuda, ein Masai. Rav Yehuda explains what this means. Ein Masai is not shemaskal actually heavy shlish. Rav Yehuda says that is limited. This heter that we just said is only if it's less than a third of its growth. More than a third of the growth, even if he's intending to feed it to his animal, the ktziris remains awesome. Rav Shimon Omer, because he says as long as it's less than a third of its growth, that's not considered ktsira. Because you're not doing it, ktsira means for Michael Adam, less than that is considered Michael. If he intends to do it for Michael Behema, it can be Michael Behema, it's not considered ktsira. Shimon Omer, Yiksav Yechel Af Mishahevi Shlish. Shimon says as long as you intend to feed it to your animal, you can cut it even after it brought a shlish, even if it's a third ripe. Another thing, the koitzin pnei netias. They used to cut down the grain that was growing in an orchard. And Rashi explains, what's the reason? Because the tvua growing in an orchard will damage it. That tvua is not eligible for the aimer. Since the one reason is since it's also a weaker type of grain, so it's not eligible for the aimer. So therefore, there's no isuk tzira. Rashi says l'shnachrim ne'anatias mishum klayim. So therefore, it's going to make klayim, and therefore it's a mitzvah to take it off, and something that there's a mitzvah to be kite, so there's no isur katsir. Another two exceptions for the isur katsira before the yomer: bnei beis ha'avel, bnei bittul beis hamedrash. If you have to clear a space for an avel, they used to make an outside clearing to give the first meal to the avel. And if the oil was gathering for a shear and they had to clear out a bunch of land, from a part of a field to make it useful, since these are both mitzvahs, b'makam mitzvah, there's no iser katsira. The Mishnah continues, Lo yasa oisen krichas. When we said that these three things that we just said, you can be kaitzer, you can cut them, but you can't then make them into bundles. Aminichin tzvasen. You just leave them loose. You can't. You're not allowed to tie them up. The Gemara is going to explain why. Mitzvah sa'aymer lavai min hakama. The mitzvah sa'aymer, that the mincha sa'aymer comes from the standing grain. Loi matzah yevi min amarim. But if you don't have, if you didn't, if they weren't able to find on erev on erev Pesach I'm sorry, on the 16th day of Pesach, um, comma standing grain to cut for the aymer, they could take from that which was already cut. Again, we have your question: how did they have was already cut? It's also to cut.
I
Maybe,
think I think it's a
may,
disadvantage that we have no idea about, like
no. This is a halacha question. I
farming.
wonder.
Like I don't know when they like to me I picture it like going to the grocery like Matzayantiv. Everyone runs and checks their like I'm trying to figure out when they did this.
Well, which part are you trying to?
I'm trying to
There's
picture everyone leaving their Seder and going out in the
no,
fields and
just one person. It was just a bezdin. They were going to get the minchasayim.
I'm talking about the people to eat it. I'm not talking about the best. I'm talking about like,
Oh, who
everyone
was
eats
eating? What was
who's
everyone getting food to eat on?
with
No,
yeah,
listen, I don't know. They were eating yashim. They had from the previous year. Well, we have to know the halacha of when it becomes mutter.
right.
Like we said, there's all these exceptions of when you can be kaitzer. Now, I guess you could have from these things, like they had to do it for a shear, or they had to do it for an oval. That seems a bit, individualistic. That shouldn't come. But it could be that they also cut in advance in case they wouldn't be able to find. They wanted to have fresh in case they wouldn't be able to find. Let's say this, they didn't want it to get ruined, so they wanted to make sure they had a minchas aimis. They were allowed to cut for the minchas aimis. There's no problem to cut. So if they cut it for the minchas aimis, that's fine. Mitzvah lovay min halach. Their mitzvah is to take it from fresh, from full of moisture. Loimata yavi yavish. But if they can't find, they'll have to take a dried one. Mitzvah say liksa v'layla. The mitzvah is to cut it the night of the 16th. Niksa v'yayim kosher. But if you do it by day, it's kosher. V'deiches Shabbos. The ksira of the Eimer is deicha not just the Yom Tov, which is certainly that's the mitzvah, but it's even deicha Shabbos. If it comes out on Shabbos, you still cut the Eimer and bring it. Tanya. Um, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see in the Gemara a little bit more about this. So, Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Yom Noimer, Kasav Echad Aimer, Ksartem Es Ktsirchem, Evesem Es Aimer. One pasuk says you should harvest your harvest, and then bring the Aimer. That's mashma, not like this last Mishnah. It's mashma that you can harvest your harvest. It first says you make your harvest, and then you bring the Aimer. We just said you're not allowed to harvest before the Aimer. Uksiv Reishis Ktsirchem Ela Kayin. Then it says that the first cutting should go to the Kayin, meaning that you're not allowed to harvest before the Aimer. HaKetzad. So it's coming to tell you the first thing of the mission. From a place that you can bring the Aimer, there's an Isser to be Kaitzer. That's why it says Rishis Kitzirchem. Makam Shiyata maybe Ata Kaitzer. But from a place that you're not going to be able to bring the Aimer, then you can be Kaitzer. So that explains the first thing of a Mishnah that we said that you can Beis Hashlochen is mutter to be Kaitzer because you can't bring the Aimer from it. How do you know that's what it's saying? Maybe it's saying if you're taking from a type of from barley, which is the only one of the chamesh mini dagon that you're allowed to bring the aimer, that you can't harvest beforehand. But the other four types of mini dagon, there's no isser of cutting them. It still remains an isser to eat them, but maybe the isser katsira doesn't apply to them. So Gemara says you can't say that. We learned out from Xer Shava earlier, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that the Isser Ksira as well as the Isser Achila, both of them apply to all five mini dog. We said in the Mishnah, Anshe Yerichai Kaitzim Baratzin Chachamim V'Gaitzin Shalai Baratzin Chacham. Right? We said So let's start. Let's remind ourselves. We said first the Tanakamo, the first part of the Mishnah said, "Koitzel shachas machal lebehema." You can harvest unripe grain to feed it to an animal. Rabbi Yehuda says that's only actually maybe. What did we say? Well, I'm sorry, this is on the first part. Anshe kaitzen beis hashachim makom avloy goychin. Anshe yiricha kaitzen beratzon chacham goychin shaloi beratzon chacham. So this is I mixed it up. This is still talking about the din of beis hashlachim, an irrigated field. Yiricha was an irrigated area, and they would be kaitzer like the chacham allowed, but they went ahead and they were also goydish, like the Tanakhama had said, that you can't be goydish even an irritated field. You can't pile it up. There's a worry that they're going to eat it. So who is the man the Amar who says that we distinguish that the Chachamim, certain things they allow you to do, and the Moicha and other things they're not Moicha? Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda, as we're going to see from a Brisa. In fact, the Gemara, if it's going to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, is it true that Rabbi Yehuda held that the Ksira of these people, of the Anshe Yericha, that it was allowed? But Tanya, Shisha Dvarim Ashu Anshe Yericha. So first we're going to say Ramei Shita. There's 6 things that the Anshe Yericha did. Shloisha Baratzon Chacham. Shloisha Shloi Baratzon Chacham. I says the Anshe Yericha were a troublesome lot. And they were doing a bunch of things that were sketchy. These 3 things they did that the Chamim were okay with. Markivin the Kolam Kol Hayayim, they would graft trees the entire day of Yud Daled Nisan, of Erev Nisan. We're not supposed to do Malacha on Erev Pesach, I'm sorry. And they said that grafting trees is not a Malacha. It's very simple work, it's easy work, and therefore it's allowed. And the Chamim said, you're right. The Karchan Eshema, there's a number of pshatim, but one pshat is that they took away the Seif Pasuk at the end of after Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad B'Yahavta, they would go straight into the next Pasuk. The Kaitzrin Lifnei HaOmer, and they would also do Katsira before the Omer in their Beis HaShlachin, like our Mishnah said. B'Ratzon Chacham. The Elu Shaloi B'Ratzon Chacham, and these things were not B'Ratzon Chachamim. Goyshin Lifnei HaOmer, they would, like our Mishnah said, they would pile up this Beis HaShlachin Katsira that they made. Matirin Gam Zivas Shel Hekdesh Shel Churov Shel Shikma. They would allow the branches of carob and of sycamore. These are 2 types of trees that are mainly used for their wood. And the Anshe Yerichai had previously been Mekadesh these trees. They said that the later growth, the branches that grow on it, since they're not usable for wood, that was not intended to be part of the hektish that they had made of the tree, and therefore they were mata them. And the Chum were not maskim, or parts and pirtzes begin to say in a part they saying, lahachal neshel aniyim b'shnei betzuras b'shabbat b'yamim tovim. They would make openings in their gardens and in their orchards in order to allow whatever fruit fell down to be eaten by the aniyim. The problem is, we're worried that if they're going to come eat things that fell on Shabbos and Yom Tov, they'll come also to pick. So therefore, the Chum guys are against it. There was also Shaloi B'Rtzayin Chacham. Divrei Meir. This is all Reb Meir. So Reb Meir is saying the din of our Mishnah, but Reb Meir doesn't say anything about Michai v'Loi Michai. He just says the Chum allowed and didn't allow. He does't get into Micha v'Loi Micha. So we don't believe Reb Meir could be the Tan of our Mishnah, which discusses the Chum are not Moicha legabi the Gedisha. The Reb Meir just says that it's asur altogether. That the Chum was Shaloi B'Ratzon Chacham. Amal Rabbi Yehuda in B'Ratzon Chacham Heinoisin you kolad the Meisim came. He said Yehuda says you have to make some kind of distinction here. Why would we say a din of what the Bnei Yerichai did, and it was Beratz and Chachamim? It would be everyone would be allowed to do it. Why would we say that the Bnei Yerichai did something that was Beratz and Chachamim? Just say it's mutter. So Ella Elu ve'elu shalai Beratz and Chachamim. All of these things were Shalai B'Ratzon Chacham. Even the first three things, including which one of them was the Katsira of the Beis HaShlochin in Yericha. And the three of them, the Chachamim said something to the Bnei Yerichai, and three of them they didn't learn Micha. So now we understand why we're talking about Bnei Yerichai, because we're talking about the fact of whether the Chachamim were Meicha them, whether they figured whether they decided it was worthwhile to chastise them or not. So and then we list them. Makivin the Kol like we said, the first three things that are they said you shouldn't do, but they were not Meicha, is they're grafting trees on Erev Pesach. The Karchan and Shema, and they read the Shema all as one pasuk. The Kaitzrin, and they would be Kaitzer the Beis from the Beis HaShlochin, the Goitchen, and they would also do the piling up of Fnei Yaima for the Yaima. Now this is a problem, right? Now Rabbi Yehuda is the man that was saying Micha v'lei Micha, the Gabi Goitchen, but he also included Kaitchen in Micha v'lei, that they were not Meicha. Says Kaitchen v'Goitchen. He said they were not Meicha on the Goitchen. They were not, and our Mishnah says that they were Meicha on the Goitchen. The Elu, and we will continue the Brisa of Elu Shemicha biyadam, and these things they were Meicha, Chamu Meicha, and then Matirin Gamzi Yishal Hegdish. They were mater the branches of Hegdish al Chruvish al Shikma, or parts and pits of Musem by the saying Kedelach al Neshel Aniyan. These they would open it up in spite of the fact that Aniyan might come to eat, to pick from them, Shnei Betzuras, in the years of famine, Shabbos and Yom Tov, even though it was Shabbos and Yom Tov, but Noisnin Peya L'Yerek. And the third thing that they were Micha B'Yadam, is that they would consider to be Yerek to be Peya. So they would allow that Aniyim would take Peya even from vegetables. Midaraisa, vegetables are not peya. There's only peya on I think tfua and maybe from trees as well, but not for vegetables. But the problem is if they take peya from vegetables, it's not really peya. Then the aniyim are achroi to take off maisrus. So they said you're not allowed to do that. You can't take off peya for something that's not midaraisa peya without taking off maisrus. Umicha biyada. So in any case, we have it Shver, who is the man the Amar who says that they were not Meicha on Goitchen, because Rabbi Yehuda who said Micha v'lei Micha, he said you are Meicha by Goitch. I'm sorry. He says who says that he said the problem is Ktsira. We said Ktsira they were not Meicha b'Yadam in our Mishnah, and in this Brisa Rabbi Yehuda included Ktsira amongst the things that they were Meicha. Am I getting this right? Let me guess. No, they had Kaitzim and Goitchen. They were not Meicha on, and we say that they were Meicha on Goitchen. In fact, the Gemara Ulatamech Shisha Shivahavi. This whole there's a problem anyway. There's an inherent problem with this price. It says there are 6 things. Then it lists, in addition to the original 6 that Remeir had said, it also added on this last one of Peya and included Kaitzin and Gaitchin. So however you divide up the Micha and Lai Micha, it's Shver. Alasam Mikan Ktsira. We have to take away the case of Ktsira. That means because in the Brisa we had said Kaitzrin we said that they are Lai Micha B'Yadan. The Mishnah he said it's Micha B'Yadan, but it must have been, it was a mistake, and you have to take out Ktsira altogether. It wasn't addressed at all. Yehuda didn't say anything about it. in the case. It's a little hard to understand, though, why he would make a list and leave out ksira, since we know that from our Mishnah that he holds ksira is moicha b'yadan, and the Brisa he just leaves it out. Okay, okay, we're gonna have to stop over here.
You have a great day.